On the road, in the gym, at a coffee house. No matter where you listen, this is Prevention Perk. I'm Steve Miller with Mid-America PTTC. It's time to perk up our prevention efforts. My guest today is Greg Puckett, a native Southern West Virginian with a passion for prevention. He has worked tirelessly to bring special projects and initiatives to his community. He led the charge to support funding for teen courts throughout West Virginia, serves on several state committees, and on the Board of Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, CADCA, where he is a past recipient of CADCA's National Advocate of the Year Award. For the past decade, he has traveled throughout the United States to train communities on sustainability, and locally has worked to revitalize his hometown of Princeton, West Virginia. Through the Princeton Renaissance Project, the group has been actively using culturally effective change strategies to revitalize its local downtown theater. The project is also a community engine to reduce substance misuse, reinvigorate hope in its young people, and engage the future while embracing its past. He is the father of two children, Lauren and Joseph, who keep him dedicated to making positive changes and leaving a legacy for the next generation to follow. Hello, Greg, and welcome to Prevention Perk.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you having me.
Love having you here. I've learned a little bit from you just in some casual conversation, but I'm really excited to unpack the work that you've been doing. And it always starts with the same question. How in the world did you get interested in this kind of work? What was your path to prevention like?
Well, I think I've got to throw the blame over to both of my parents, obviously. My dad is, he was the hard worker. He was the one that constantly just, fed the idea in my mind that you got to get out and to make change happen. You gotta work for it. And so he came from pretty tough background, and so he instilled that in me. My mom gave me the educational side. She was a teacher and also a principal locally, and so she gave me that administrative stuff. And they were always just like, look, if you don't like what you see, don't give up. Don't go somewhere else where it's better. Stay and fix it and see what you can do to make it better. And I think for me, looking at the community, knowing what we see, Southern West Virginia isn't, we've got our challenges, right? Substance use, we've got economics, we've got all these things. But if somebody's not willing to stay behind and work on it, then, it won't be better for the next generation to come. So that's kind of how I got into it.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The funder of this project, along with all the other products of the Mid-America PTTC, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Visit samhsa.gov/practitioner training for tools, training, and technical assistance to practitioners in the field of mental health and substance use disorders. Now, you and I kind of cross paths because of a friend of the podcast, Ricky Barton. She's been a guest here before, and she's probably one of the most passionate people I know, especially around social media. So, and how it affects teen mental health. So for the listeners, that they might want to go back and look through the episodes and hear Ricky talk about that. But she thought that you and I might hit it off because we have a shared interest in the arts and a whole lot of other things like the community revitalization and that kind of stuff. But you've already shared with me that somewhere in the neighborhood of, did you say 28 murals have been painted in your community as kind of a way to revitalize, but also as a way to, as an alternative activity? So talk a little bit about those projects that you've had.
Yeah, so we started a few years ago, and let me start off by saying too that Ricky Barton is a force. She's not only a connector, she's a force of nature, and she really is a driver. She's an inspiration to so many people out in the community, and she certainly inspires me a lot, sort of her drive. And a lot of times I think that I'm working really hard, and then I look what she's doing and I'm like, okay, I got to catch up. But so I'm really glad we got to connect on this one. But the one thing that we share, she and I do, is this passion for preventative based solutions. And one of the biggest parts of that is if you want to see something change, sometimes you've got to put the physical presence out there to make that change happen, which means that local environment has to change if you want the behavior to change. So, we took that to heart and said, in my community, let's get some paintings on some walls. Let's get our local artists together. Let's do some other things. And then we didn't want just one mural or two. We wanted 10. we wanted 20 and some other things. And the 28 is actually, I think we're in the 40s now collectively, but 28, I've painted 28 buildings in some way, shape, or form, either through a mural or just, painting on walls. A lot of times communities, they don't need a lot. They just need color, or they need, an inspiration. And, a lot of these downtown communities, you see the facades, you see the dental molding on the top, and, just things that are really architecturally significant that are getting lost in, this blank canvas of what somebody's gone back in to paint white on a building. But, my goal is to look at that and say, okay, that's an inspiration in itself. And if you can change that environment and give somebody the hope of something else, then it works. And I mean, we've just in the buildings I've painted, I've seen businesses go in. They couldn't see what the building could be until they got color on the wall. And then once they did, then economics came back in. And in our downtown, now we've got 2 downtowns in my county that are absolutely seeing this whole rebirth and reintegration as people move away from malls and all that stuff. We're becoming reconnected into that downtown cultural heart. So yeah, it's a great challenge. I do it a lot for my own soul. So it's a passion project, but also it might be a small insanity project. So,
well, there's a whole study. I mean, there about the broken windows and just the ripple effect of what that means. In that, once the window is broken, then the door jamb falls off, and the community starts to deteriorate, or neighborhoods.
right.
And so it just, in some cases, you just need to put a fresh coat of paint on it, and it's like, wow, it starts to build some pride in the community.
Yeah, it does. And that's the thing that we saw too, is that, in addition to being, with executive director community connections and some other things that I do, my mom gave me that passion. She gave me that artistic flair. And she, even as a kid where she was in the school system, I'm sure you remember those old overhead projectors with the little, the adjustable top on there. We use the transparencies. Well, back in the day, my mom would see stuff and she would put it on that transparency, and she would have me shoot it onto the wall, trace it out, and then go back and put that artistic vision on things within school settings. That was sort of the start of that. And I'd gotten out of it for many years. And then when we all kind of came together because of this Renaissance project, the theater and so on downtown, that was what really kind of drove the thought of, wow, if I could do some of that, that will make people think different. And if they think different, they act different. And so it's an amazing driver.
Well, I've never been to southern West Virginia, but I've been to a lot of rural pockets in the state where I live, and you see this, decay, I guess, is the best way to describe it. That sounds a horrible way to say, but that people have flown from the rural parts to the urban areas for jobs and lifestyle and that kind of stuff. But there's something to salvage there, and I'm assuming that before you kind of got your fingerprints on this, that the community that you live in was one of those that was on the verge of, completely becoming a ghost town or disappearing or not really being an economic contributor, so to speak. Is that really kind of the case there? And you've seen it, bounce back from that?
I mean, and that's the thing, is that, I am a lifer here. And so I remember what it was like when I was growing up. I remember the heyday of all the stores downtown. And along about the mid 80s, we did get a mall, like, a lot of other communities get. We got a sort of this area that came together between 2 municipalities into one. And so the cultural heart of both of these towns got ripped out. The city then, we used to do cruising, and that sort of the culture in southern West Virginia was, you get in your car on a Friday or Saturday night, and you cruise the strip, right? And you go up and you see your friends, and you might see them at school, but then on a Friday night, you get that setting. Well, the community was like, we're not going to have any more cruising. We're taking the signage off of the buildings. We're going to, it was just, you basically gentrified the whole thing and you pushed everybody out. So at the one time we had, it's unfortunate, 17 prostitutes that we had documented on this one long city street. Drug use was rampant, crime bad, all the businesses vacated. And so this was like the place where you did not go. And so back in 2012, 13, several of the artists and myself, and we kind of got together and said, you know what, we're gonna change it through the arts and some other things. And we went to I'll never forget, we went to a Rotary meeting. We told them, we were like, give me some vision words of what you see this street. And they were all negative. And then I said, what if in 10 years it was going to be this, this, and this? And they were like, never happened. Well, I'm happy to say now that we've got a parking problem downtown. We've got 5,000 more cars per day. We've got, businesses almost in every place. And we've got buildings now that are so full, we don't have any place for more businesses. So it can happen, but sometimes you just got to be willing to get out there and put the sweat equity in and make it work.
Do you have a straight line that you could draw between the art and some of this revitalization? I mean, is that kind of the starting point, and
Yeah.
everything else just kind of fell into place once you put that fresh coat of paint on the wall? Everybody was like, wow, downtown's starting to look like a place that I can visit.
And the city got out of the way. I think that was the best part. We had to initiate the trust. And I think that's what came down. I mean, we did some permits for walls, and we did some things, just to try to get some color on there. But after the city saw what we were doing, they basically trusted us. I'll never forget. So in 2013, when we started all this process, and I remember the street that I just talked about, we said, we're going to do a New Year's celebration like Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve, New York style, but we're going to do it downtown. We're going to have a giant CD ball. We're going to drop it, from the top of the fire truck, and we're going to do this celebration. Well, first year we ever did it, we didn't know what we were going to design. We actually we asked people to donate their CDs and write something inspirational on an old CD and give it back to us. And we incorporated that into this giant 6-foot disco ball sort of. And then we dropped it from the fire truck. We have over 1,000 people on New Year's Eve. And that was the most people we had seen in downtown community. We had it was like the kickstart of all of it. And, but it took the arts. It took that, like you said, that straight line of like, if we do this, this will happen. And I'd seen it, you mentioned my travels. I'd seen it on Route 66, for years. That all got bypassed. And then now you're starting to see that rebirth of these downtowns, and I learned a lot by the travels and what I could bring back. So a lot of the rural communities and things that I did, I didn't do it on my own. I basically stole those ideas and creatively switched them and made them ours. So
yeah, that's a great, when you get out of town and you see how other people are doing it, it can be a huge inspiration. I want to know more about this Princeton Renaissance Project and the theater, because I read a little bit about that on your website. I mean, you get the kids involved in this. I mean, it kind of feeds back to them. I mean, it's really bringing in the arts. It got the youth involved in their community. It's kind of a way of paying back. So I'm curious about that project and what that's been like, not only for the youth, but also for the community.
That was another catalyst. Like it's kind of like building blocks. And, when we started looking at, what we needed in this community, one of the major parts was the one building that was an old theater, started out as the Royal Theater back in 1911, and then became the LaVon Theater because a guy by the name of Dr. Lawrence Von Court named it after himself, called it the LaVon Theater. That's how most people knew it around here. But over time, like all other small downtowns, it became a church. It became a nice place for congregation. The movies went out, and now we've got a faith-based entity downtown, did a soup kitchen and everything else. It wasn't conducive to the change. And so we got some local support from a local foundation, bought this old building, and then have been still in this process of revitalizing that theater. We now have gotten enough grants. I think we've got about $1.5 million where we're going to see the finish line. But what's funny about that is, so another community in my county heard about all the success, and there's always a competition between Princeton and Bluefield. It's kind of funny the way it works. But they heard about what we were doing. They said, well, we've got a theater over here. And they had a few more support mechanisms that wasn't through nonprofit. And they got their theater up and running in about 5 years, where ours is still in that process. But what it does is it is a catalyst. It gets people involved. It lets people think about things in a different way, and where it's not quite where it needs to be right now within about a year and a half. And what's really creative about that space, just to give you this little sidebar. So I'm sure everybody online knows Bob Denver, who was Gilligan, right, from Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
Well, his wife Dreama is from here, and she's a friend of ours. And so she's got a lot of museum pieces. And so we are actually going to have the Bob Denver, the Gilligan Museum in this theater on the one side where there was a jewelry store. And so it's going to be really a unique thing where we're going to have this whole museum piece set aside just for Bob Denver. So it's going to be kind of fun, bringing a lot of people in.
Now, I'm naive here. Do the young people know Gilligan's Island? Like young kids today?
Yes.
They
So
do?
if you go to the right ones, not everybody, but if you ask them to sing the theme song, I'm sure they'll sit back and hear a tale. So it's all good.
That's fantastic. Well, you not only the projects that you're talking about already, but there's other things. I mean, you're a city or county commissioner?
County commissioner.
County
Yeah.
commissioner. So yeah, you've got your finger in the pot all the way around. But I think what would be interesting for the listeners to hear is you're talking about a predominantly rural area. You're not in a big metro area. Now you might be the economic hub for that area, but by and large, it's predominantly rural. And the term that caught my attention was culturally effective change strategies.
Right.
And I think maybe if you could talk us through some of how this has happened in a rural area, like how have you been able to band the community together and find financial support and people in the community to actually invest alongside, this vision that you and others share?
Well, I think that's the important part is the fact that it is a combined vision. If you get one person to have one, then you can get stuck on an island pretty quickly. So you've got to get a team and a framework together. And, I have been able to be very blessed. I'm very active with the National Association of Counties. And I served as chair of their Rural Action Caucus, which basically serves about 60% of the United States population. And I get a chance to hear from a lot of these communities. And I do like to drive. Ironically enough, I've got a Subaru that's 2.5 years old. It's got 126,000 miles on it. I do like to drive.
You drive.
I drive a lot. And I go through these small communities because that's how you learn. I could fly, but I wouldn't learn. And so I take the time, I go through the small towns. And I'm like, oh, I like this or that. But it's the rural impact of, how you get that story across. And then once you have the trust of the community, not everybody, being an elected official, you get up 50% of the people hate you half the time anyway. So it's fine. But once you get enough trust and enough momentum and you kind of move things forward, people start to see your shared vision and they start to understand that, oh, this really can work. And, like a lot of other rural communities, I mean, we're seeing a rural, renaissance. I keep using that word, but we're seeing it across the country is that people are gravitating back to these areas. And I think, COVID taught a lot of people things that I think we knew, but we didn't trust. We knew we could get on Zooms. We knew we could do this. Technology was not foreign to us, 10 years ago, but it's just become so common now. And I think it's the fact that, people are migrating up, but they don't need to be in cities much anymore. They don't need to have that high cost of living. They can go to rural, be online, and be just as effective, if not more effective, because their quality of life is better. And so I think that's sort of what we're seeing here is, this is the best part about where I live. I can be anywhere 12 hours from here. I can be within 60% of the US population. I mean, I can drive anywhere within 12 hours and really have an impact and learn from, and people can come here as well. And I think that geographic centralization gives us such an amazing advantage to help tell our good story.
Well, you give me a lot of ideas here and several questions. First of all, you talk like there's kind of a framework, like there's a framework that people could follow, whether you're urban, core urban, you're in a rural area, whatever that is. Is it finding your own unique story in that for your community? Like, how do I tell the story of this Renaissance? And now you've got Bob Denver's, museum there. But more than that, is it finding that path within that framework? It doesn't sound like it's complicated. It's just being able to have that vision.
It's the message. It's really what makes you have that uniqueness that transforms, the ideas into the reality. And there is a framework. I mean, Ricky and I will work together. We teach people across the country on this. Basically, if you can assess your local conditions, determine if you've got capacity. Because a lot of rural communities, the capacity, you can do the assessment. You might know where you are data wise. You may or may not have the capacity in which to do it, either fiscally or human. That's going to be your hard part. But then you can actually plan some things. You can implement those strategies and then evaluate them. And if you do them in a very culturally competent way, you'll have good, strong sustainability down the line. That is the 7-part framework that I think preventionists like myself look at every single day. And I don't think it's about any one particular thing. I think it's a methodology for life. I use that framework from the time I wake up in the morning, time I go to bed at night. I evaluate everything at the end of the day of what I did and whether I was able to capture that. So yeah, it's the framework, but the messaging comes from the data. The messaging comes from knowing where you're at and where you want to go. So yeah, it's powerful.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. A podcast is like a breakout session from your daily routine. It's a unique way to perk up your prevention efforts. We'd like to hear from you. Please send your comment, topic, or guest suggestion to midamericapttc@gmail.com. I'm curious, when you said you drive everywhere and you go through these small communities, because I'm a big fan of getting off the interstate and taking the back roads, if you will. Do you see something that's trending now in some of these small communities, that you're like, oh, I'd like to take this back where I'm from, or you're seeing other communities, they're replicating this, but it's just starting to bubble up? Is there something in rural America that you're seeing that maybe we'd like to know about?
There's a methodology. There's a spirit, an entrepreneurialism that hasn't existed, I don't think, in a few decades. I think entrepreneurs have always thought, depending on where you are, you got to go get a piece of land or you got to do something else. When in fact, if you take the time and you look at what's been the cultural heart for a century, you can make that work again, and you can tell a new story. And the community kind of loses. And one of the things we had to overcome too was, we weren't putting the same businesses back in the same buildings that people knew for generations. We were putting new things in, and some of the stuff that we put on the walls in the art was not accepted well. We let artists be creative, and sometimes people liked it, and sometimes it wasn't as what people liked. But we had to understand that the change needed to happen. And I think I've seen across the country murals using the arts transforms communities from the biggest, largest metropolitan area to the smallest rural community. The arts changes the behavior. I think the other thing is that, and that kind of goes in, I've seen a lot of theaters come back. A couple of the projects that I'm working on now, it seems silly because, they're old gas stations. Well, you paint if you paint a gas station really, really nice, people look at it and they will actually, I've seen people pull their cars in front and get a picture with their cars in the gas station. I mean, it's amazing what that can do to transform somebody. So definitely the arts. I think the other thing is really, increasing the amount of establishments and doing it in a cycle of threes. If you put one business in, you might have a chance at success. Two certainly helps, but if you go three businesses at a cluster, even in a downtown metropolitan environment, even in rural, we saw a microbrewery go in here locally, that was not acceptable back in the day. We also saw, another salon and another insurance agency. We saw things start going into these areas, and it created a cluster and an environment that people wanted to be, because then it became trust. And that's why I say that, usually is a cycle of threes. But those are the things that I think are common, from Holbrook, Arizona to Princeton, West Virginia, or wherever you happen to be. There is a methodology to make all that work.
Yeah, when you talked about the service station, I see that in small communities that I pass through, that there's something about that nostalgia. They're not gas stations now; they're just
right.
They're trophies, if you will. They're a place for the community to take pictures or whatever. And in Paducah, Kentucky, they have a station downtown. It's their visitor center, which is, but it looks like you could pull up. I mean, there's no working pumps, but it's like that, and I think it's thinking outside the box in a way to keep some of that old that defined the community and mix it in with some new ideas, like a brewery or whatever that looks like. Coffee shops are the big rage.
Right.
If you can attract one of those downtown, then you attract people, because those are things that they are interested in consuming.
So there's a couple of things, and I'll give you a couple of examples in West Virginia. Thomas, West Virginia, which is in Tucker County, which is a bedroom community. It's about 2 hours west of Washington, D.C., about 2.5 hours south of Pittsburgh. It had been a community basically rural, geographically isolated. People went up there maybe to go ski, but nobody really ever paid attention. And Thomas had gone through a really, depressing state of time. And that area is now such a hub. I mean, the property values have skyrocketed to where even locals have a hard time, but everybody's moving from the outside in because they love that environment. If you go like on Route 66, there's a place, Galena, Kansas. It's just a little sliver where Route 66 runs through. that little town has a lot of murals. They got a place called Gearhead Curios. It's an amazing little old Texaco station. They had a fair. I was driving through last year, and they had a Ferris wheel and a fair that was set up next to that. And it was so many people, hundreds and hundreds of people coming downtown. That same area 10 years ago would have been desolate. I think there's just so much culture and amazing things in those little communities. And I think everybody can kind of steal the ideas from them.
So, with the youth perspective on this, do they understand what they're kind of being a part of? I mean, is that translated in maybe some of the education that you do as you're doing this process? Like you're building your community, but at the same time, it's an alternative activity to risky behaviors and those kinds of things. Do the youth that are engaging in your community, do they understand this process that they're involved in?
I think they do to a point. I think they now, we're living in a selfie generation. So, they'll go downtown, they'll take photos, they'll do their Instagram shots, and, they'll see things that a few years ago would have never been possible. But I think they're just, I don't want to say they're taking it for granted. I just think they're enjoying being in the moment, maybe without understanding to exactly why. But I can also say that there's much more of an appreciation now than we've had in the past. And I think there's a pride factor. I mean, even within the county, from some of the stuff we've done, we've torn down almost 200 structures just in the last year and a half of dilapidated and blight, things that, were creating a sense of hopelessness for generations. And I think people are starting to see they like a little more regulation. They like a little more things. And if the youth are going to benefit from this, I think they may just be taking it for granted. And I don't know that we are educating enough, but I can tell you that they are reaping the benefits from the work.
Well, I think it's interesting. I hear this a lot when I do trainings, and community leaders at coalitions will say, the number one thing the kids complain about is there's nothing to do. And I've heard that in a community of 792 people. And I've heard that from people that work in St. Louis, and there's millions of people there. Teens are teens. If you have something for them to do and it sounds like it's new or it's different, or they're going to miss out on something if someone else is doing it, it'll attract attention, and it gives them something to do. It's not a question of there's nothing to do. It's a question of what is the community offering them to get done.
Yeah, I think so. That statement resonated more with me, I think, probably around 7-8 years ago. I'd driven out. I was on Venice Beach in LA. No, shortage of things to do, obviously. No. And, I was sitting there, and I was playing ball. I came over and sat down, and some of the kids were just sitting watching the stuff. And so, what is there to do around here? I was just being facetious because knowing there's a ton. They're like, oh, there's nothing to do around here. I'm like, have you looked around here to see what there is? I mean, I came specifically to play basketball at Venice Beach. There's tons of stuff. It's your perception. It depends on what your idea of what you want to do is at that moment. And you got to make people interested enough to where they'll want to be engaged and actually go out and do more.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that basketball thing as well. That's something that you're known for. You've kind of set up a league, I guess, that you've been involved with, and you like the hoop as well. So talk a little bit about basketball in your life, and does that play into some of the things you're doing in the community?
It does. It is getting a little longer in the tooth here, a little more gray. So a number of years ago in my prevention work, I needed a way to get a hook to get in and talk to some kids in schools. Basketball is a universal game. I mean, you grab a ball, you get a hoop, you can do it anywhere. You can use a paper basket if you want to. But I formed a team called the Drug-Free All-Stars. We actually were a group of guys and girls from local media outlets, and we said, let's go in and be able to talk to kids and do like a Harlem Globetrotters type show with a message. That was 19 years ago. And, at the time I started it sort of as a way to get paid and play basketball and enjoy my life. But over time, the message changed. The things that we saw from the kids, the need changed. I'll give you a quick example. So I was in a very rural community, little school, Glen Fork, West Virginia, in Wyoming County, middle of nowhere. It's like a K-12 school, about 115 kids, very small school. We'd gone over, I was getting there late during the day, we were there. I was getting there late. I had a couple people coming in. We ended up having 5 as a squad, and We had 4 to a point, and I picked this one kid out of the crowd to come in and play with us, just to have, to get 5. Right before the end of the half, this kid came over the 3-point line and he nailed a 3-point shot, and like the crowd went nuts, and it was so much fun. By that point, the other guy was coming down to join us as our 5th, and usually at halftime, I have a kid, try for a half-court shot for a special prize. And it was a 5-disc CD changer, so I'll tell you how technology's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a few years ago. But so I get this kid to do it. He comes up, the first 2 shots, he's just off the mark. 3rd shot, crowd's cheering, it's getting pumped. He flips it back to himself. He throws it up, and it looks like that ESPN highlight where the ball's just rotating in midair, just really, really slow. And it was nothing but the bottom of the net. And when he did it, he ran around like Jim Valvano and like the Wolfpack back in '82, and trying to find somebody to hug. And he found his guidance counselor, and he buried his head into her chest, and he just started bawling. And pretty soon it was like a wave into a little bit of crying, we were crying. We didn't know what we were crying, but it was just like this whole wave of emotion. And in the 3rd quarter, the guidance counselor comes over and she says, you really don't know what you did for this young man. And she asked how we chose him. It was just random. But his father was incarcerated. His mother had substance use issues, and he's being raised by his grandparents. And a month before that game, their house had burned to the ground. And the only thing, the greatest present that he had ever been given was this 5-disc CD change radio. And it was at that moment, I think, that we all realized that we had a little bit of a divinity in what we were doing, and that part of prevention, the message changed. So, not only were we providing fun, but we were providing hope. And, here we are. We're in our 19th year. We're going to do one more before I bow out gracefully and retire. But, we've done 509 games in that timeline. We've been to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We've been to Long Island, New York. We've done things in other communities because of partnerships. And we typically stay rural. And it's an amazing way to express, again, in one way, using the arts plus athleticism. But yeah, I know it's changed me, and I'm pretty sure it's changed everybody else that's been part of this whole process. But it's a pretty good show. It's a lot of fun.
Have you heard directly from some of the youth that you may have been in their community or their school? They touch back with you and say, this really had an impact in some way on my life?
Oh, yeah. 2 weeks ago. So I still play pretty active when my knees are, happy with me. I was down in a little community, West Virginia. It's about 45 minutes south, and I'm playing in the gym down there, and the kid comes up, and I'm 53 now. And this kid comes up, he's like, I know you. And I was like, he said, are you this guy from the office? I said, yeah. And he said, you came to my middle school. This kid was 29 years old, and he remembered me from his middle school. So it's like, and now here we are playing, right? I've had a couple players on our team that, we played in their elementary school, and then as they got older, they were in college, and then they ended up coming playing for us as well. So we've got an amazing track record of success over the years, and I will probably say that it's one of the greatest programs we've ever done. I wish that Father Time would be kind, but eventually, he will let me know when that is no longer available. But I guarantee you, we will have left a legacy that's something to be really proud of.
Well, the next question that's been formulating in my mind is kind of around the sustainability aspect, because we're talking rural, we're talking a lot of these things do take funding and those kind of things. But then as you talk about a project like this, the basketball, part of the sustainability is you just don't quit. You just keep doing it as long as you possibly can, because I'm a firm believer that it does take some money to grease the wheels and make some changes, but it takes people being invested or involved, or a person that comes from their heart. They just want to keep doing this. There's that sustainability, and you kind of travel around. That's part of on the road. You're talking about sustainability. When you're talking in a community, are you talking about how they can, use economics and sustain changes in their community? Are you talking about sustainability through the lens of like prevention initiatives? Are you just a kind of let's build a plan and let's find a way to keep this thing going forward?
All of the above. I think, again, I think it gets back to the framework. I think it gets back into, understanding that that framework is good for just about everything. If it's fiscal sustainability for a particular program that you want to do, then you work through that so that you understand how you're going to be able to sustain it. I will say that human capital is probably going to be the most needed, because no matter what, if you lose the intellect out of a person, then a lot of the other programs and initiatives you want to do will never be possible. So, the investing in people, I think, is significant, much more so than just, a curriculum or something like that. And that's what we see with the grant world. That's the hardest part, is that, typically feds give you a 1 to 3 to 5 year grant cycle, if you're lucky. And you might have that person you spend, 6 months getting them, training them, getting them close. If you get a 3-year cycle, you got a year and a half of them hopefully doing a good job. But then that last 6 months is going to be, oh my God, how am I going to keep them? And you've invested all this time and energy. And in the state of West Virginia, there is no long-term sustainability for prevention-based efforts. So when we start talking to communities, it's all about, how do we keep people? That's number one, because you can't have people, you can't fix anything else. And I don't have to go back every 3 years and have to retrain somebody else. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. So it becomes, how do you have relationships? How do you get with your local elected officials? How do you get with, your school system? How do you get with all these things? And if the sustainability is a program, I can almost say there will always be money for something, a thing. But when you're looking at sustainability of a system, it's the relationships. It's the process of making sure the right people are right, at the table, to then be able to make decisions to see, yeah, that's valuable. We want to invest in it.
So what is your philosophy or practice, process, whatever that looks like, to pour into a staff member or that human capital? I mean, what is it you're doing actively to show that you're investing in them, so to the point where they want to stay there and be invested in?
You got to pay people well. I will say that that's the number one factor as a nonprofit. I've seen it many, many times. When you limit the amount of sustainability for an individual to have a quality of life, you will not get the results that you want. So I'm a firm believer that I take the best amount that I have for a sustainable wage at a local level, and I make sure that that person is secured. I probably give a lot more. I give a lot of flex in what I give my employees. They have laptops. We have an office for them, but they also have the flexibility to work at home. We're living in a different world, and the needs and the wants of the employment workforce are different now than they were. And employers can't dictate and come down with a heavy hand the way they used to, because there's enough jobs out there paying at a fairly decent wage where somebody can go and take that same expertise and get it somewhere else and enjoy their life. So pay them well. The other thing is really, what's the value of the mission? And as a nonprofit, for me, I think it's just working together and saying, look, we've got to come together in a common accord in some way, shape, or form. And if that's making the community, we've got to say in Community Connections, it's working together for stronger communities. And that's a very broad statement. But what does strength look like? And each person has a chance to decide that. And if they think that they're making a difference, then that's a great way to have sustainability.
Well, I know you talked about the theater project and the renaissance around that. Is there a project that you're looking at locally now, or is there, oh boy, it would be so great if we could do this in our community, or maybe both?
Well, keeping the message going, because I think ultimately, the project-based stuff keeps people engaged. They see progress. They've got something tangible to hold on to. I like to think of communities as just these sort of like just an amalgam of energy. And then if you can take a defined geographic environment, no matter where it is, if it's a local street or a county or even a region, and you have everybody on the same page to work to solve whatever that problem is, again, it's going to come back from the data, then you've got a chance to make it whatever you want to make it. Because right now, I think a lot of people, this is funny, and I don't mean this to sound derogatory, but a lot of people in West Virginia are probably more of Missourians in that you've got to show them. If Missouri is the show me state, West Virginia's got to be so much closer right behind.
Show me too.
Right, show me too. You've got to be able to put the sweat equity in and say, look, this will happen, and then you've got to be willing to go do the work. That's one of the things with me. I mean, being on buildings and painting and stuff. Some of the things, we hire out, or we guide artists along the way. But a lot of times I like to be the one doing it, because sometimes you just want to say, look, see, look at this, see what this looks like. See, you can do this. And then it becomes sort of, just this encouragement, and people say, oh, okay, that's a safety net, security. So yeah, I'd like to see all communities do that.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. Environmental change results from an organized community working together to reach agreed upon goals. The first step to take when trying to improve life in your community is organization, and is crucial for those working in communities to understand how to do so effectively. The Community Toolbox provides strategies for change and improvement that can help organize people for a better community. There is a link in our show notes, or visit ctb.ku.edu. Well, this has been a great conversation, Greg, and I think Ricky was right. We had a lot to talk about. I don't want to get away from here without letting you have the final say. I always let people be the sage on the stage and have the final word. Is there something you would really want the audience to think, say, or do after this conversation?
People have to have confidence in knowing that they can make a difference. And it doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter. A lot of times people will say, oh, I could just make a difference. If I can make a difference with one, then it was all worth it. I disagree. I think it's not the one. I think if the one is defined as a community, then okay. But it's not just one person, because ultimately one person has a chance to affect, millions if done right. But you got to put yourself in that position. And so for me, I challenge everybody. I'm like, don't rest. Rest some. You got to recap, but don't rest and keep going and keep pushing, because if you really want it to take place, then you're going to have to make sure that you put the effort in and do the work.
My guest on this episode has been Greg Puckett. You'll find some links in our show notes, and you'll be able to connect with him if you'd like. Thanks, Greg, for being here.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you for listening to Prevention Perk, a podcast from Mid-America PTTC. To learn more about our innovations, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.